The sky over Thryn Prime was a swirling canvas of green and violet, a storm that had lasted for centuries. Beneath it, the city of Lauren's people lay in ruins, not from the weather but from the slow decay of their planet itself. The air tasted faintly of iron, and the rivers had begun to dry. Civilization, once proud and advanced, was shrinking, collapsing under the weight of its own mistakes. The Thryn were a species of logic and discipline, and yet even their cleverest minds could not stop the dying of their world. In the high tower of the council, Lauren leaned over her desk, her four-fingered hands tracing the glowing lines of ancient diagrams. These diagrams were not just maps or schematics. They were blueprints of forbidden knowledge, the kind the gods had warned against. The gods had decreed that no Thryn should ever call upon humans for aid, that their world must either survive on its own or perish. To defy the gods was unthinkable. And yet, here she was, staring at the very designs that could summon creatures tied to humans, creatures that might save her people, or destroy them entirely. She could feel the tension in the room behind her, the quiet hum of the council's fear. They were waiting for her to speak, but she could not. The creatures she studied were not like the monsters of legend. They were smart. They were fast. They could understand strategy in ways the Thryn could not. If used correctly, they could be the salvation of Thryn Prime. If used wrongly, they could obliterate everything she cared for. Lauren's thoughts were interrupted by a knock on the door. "Enter," she called, trying to keep her voice steady. A young assistant, Rill, stepped in. "Lauren, the council grows restless," he said. "They suspect something, the storms. And yet we have no other option." The atmosphere was thinning, the crops failing. Every system the Thryn had built to protect themselves was failing, and soon there would be nothing left. She turned to her instruments, ancient tools that pulsed with faint energy. The summoning circle was etched on the floor, glowing faintly with the blue light of containment fields. Around it, her team of scientists and engineers moved in careful, rehearsed motions. Every calculation had been triple-checked, every possible outcome considered, and yet Lauren knew that no calculation could truly predict what would happen. "Focus on the containment," she instructed. "Do not let it escape the circle. We cannot survive if it does." "Understood." It was massive, taller than the council tower itself, with limbs that seemed almost skeletal yet incredibly strong. Its eyes glowed with an eerie intelligence, scanning the room, the people, the instruments. It did not roar or attack. It only looked. And yet that look was enough to send a shiver down the spine of every Thryn present. Lauren stepped forward, her hand raised. "Steady," she whispered. "We are testing. Remember, it will only follow commands if we show it reasoning it can understand. Be precise." It's following your logic." The creature moved around them with precise calculation, never touching anything, never making a misstep. "It is learning," she said softly. "It is learning from us." If anything went wrong, if their calculations were off even slightly, it could turn, and nothing in the galaxy could stand against it. The Thryn had been warned about humans for centuries, told that humans were primitive and dangerous. And yet here was proof that humans, or at least the intelligence they had left behind, were beyond anything the Thryn had imagined. Hours passed, and the creature performed task after task flawlessly. It moved supplies, repaired broken machinery, even corrected errors in their instruments. It was not a mindless monster. It was an intelligent ally, but one born from the human connection that the gods had forbidden them to seek. As the ritual ended, and the creature disappeared back into the void from which it had been called, Lauren slumped in her chair. The room was filled with exhausted but amazed murmurs. She knew the council would never fully approve, but she also knew that the planet would not survive without this knowledge. That night, alone in her quarters, Lauren studied the ancient human archives she had found hidden beneath the ruins of a forgotten library. Images flickered in holographic projections, showing humans working alongside creatures just like the one they had summoned. They trained them, communicated with them, strategized with them. And every human shown had something in their eyes that Lauren recognized immediately: curiosity, courage, and ingenuity. She realized, with a thrill she could not hide, that humans were not primitive. They had survived, thrived, and built partnerships with beings far more powerful than themselves. And now, for the first time, a Thryn could learn from them. The next morning, the council convened. Lauren presented her findings cautiously, careful to frame the knowledge as a survival necessity. The council was divided. Many were terrified, citing the gods' decree. Others were fascinated, unable to deny the evidence before them. Lauren knew she had to act quickly. The storms were worsening and the planet's decay was accelerating. If they delayed, it would be too late. She requested permission to conduct further summoning experiments, but the council hesitated. Then the first real sign of danger came. A tremor shook the city, stronger than any they had felt before. Buildings cracked, streets split, and a deep rumble filled the air. Outside, the sky burned with unnatural colors, a warning that their world was slipping beyond the point of no return. "We do not have time," Lauren said, standing before the council. "If we wait, everything will be lost. The creatures linked to humans, they are our only chance. But know this, if the gods punish us, it will be your fault." As she prepared for the next summoning, Lauren could not shake the feeling that the humans had left more than just creatures behind. They had left a legacy, a way of thinking that could change the fate of the galaxy. And if she could unlock it, if she could teach the Thryn to think like humans, then perhaps the planet could live. The ritual began again, this time more precise, more deliberate. The circle glowed, the instruments hummed, and the energy in the room thickened like a living thing. Lauren's heart pounded, not with fear, but with anticipation. Then, with a flash brighter than the storm above, the creature appeared. It was larger than before, its movements sharper, more deliberate, and its eyes gleamed with a strange recognition. It scanned the room, paused, and then almost imperceptibly bowed its massive head toward Lauren. It was an acknowledgement, not of her command, but of understanding. It knew she was different. It knew she was thinking beyond the simple logic the Thryn had relied on for centuries. And in that moment, Lauren realized that she was no longer just a scientist or a citizen of a dying planet. She was a bridge between worlds, between species, and between the laws of gods and the ingenuity of humanity. The first part of their journey had begun, and the galaxy had no idea what was coming next. The morning after the summoning, Lauren walked through the shattered streets of the city with a careful step. The storm had passed, leaving the world washed in violet light, strange and beautiful. But the beauty could not hide the cracks that ran through the buildings or the empty plazas where families once gathered. The Thryn were still alive, but the planet was far from safe. Rill met her at the council tower steps. His eyes were wide with both fear and excitement. "They are learning faster than we thought," he said. "Last night, the creature moved the debris in the streets. It even repaired some of the power conduits. I don't understand how it can do that. And if it decides we are enemies?" She presented her observations with care, showing holographic recordings of the creature moving with precision, analyzing objects, and even predicting minor failures in the city systems before they happened. Some council members whispered in awe, others in fear. An elder named Varin leaned forward. "Do you realize what you propose, Lauren? Humans are forbidden. The gods have warned us. If we continue, we may face their wrath. You are risking everything. If we do not act, there will be no city left for the gods to punish." Dust coated the floor and the air smelled of old paper and metal, but the archives contained something priceless. Human writings, diagrams, and recordings left by explorers long vanished from the galaxy. She studied the recordings for hours. Humans had faced monsters like this before. They had trained them not with fear, but with understanding. They had recognized patterns of thought in the creatures and used logic, empathy, and strategy to guide them. Lauren realized that her people had been approaching the creatures all wrong. They had treated them as tools or weapons, but humans had treated them as partners. The next day, she began training her team. They practiced improvisation exercises, problem-solving challenges, and simulations of human decision-making. At first, her team struggled. The Thryn were trained for precision, not creativity. Their minds were structured, disciplined, and inflexible, but slowly, under Lauren's guidance, they began to adapt. They started to anticipate the creature's behavior, predicting how it would react to certain actions. They learned to communicate in gestures, not just commands to show intention. They began to think in patterns like humans rather than rigid logic. Meanwhile, the planet continued its slow decay. The rivers ran thin, crops wilted, and the storms grew stronger. Lauren knew time was short. They had to understand the creature quickly or risk losing everything. The second summoning was more controlled. The containment circle glowed with energy, humming as the creature emerged. Its eyes scanned the room, glowing with intelligence. For a moment, it seemed hesitant, as though testing them. Then it stepped forward, following the gestures and signals the team had prepared. Lauren watched closely. The creature lifted debris, repaired broken machinery, and even moved supplies to safe locations. But this time, it also began to anticipate problems before they occurred. When a small fire erupted from a damaged power conduit, it extinguished it before it could spread. When a structural beam threatened to collapse, it supported it with precise force, preventing damage. The council watched from a distance, stunned. Some whispered that the creature was more intelligent than any Thrin capable of reasoning beyond their understanding. Others feared that they had crossed a line that the gods would not forgive. Lauren stepped forward. "Do you see?" she said. "It is not just following instructions, it is reasoning, it is thinking, and it is learning from us. If we continue to guide it, we can save the planet. Observe, communicate, and adapt. We must follow its lead, not force it. This is the difference humans made. They did not just fight, they thought, they planned, they adapted. That is why these creatures respond to human logic. They were mirrors of human ingenuity, reflections of a species that had mastered survival through creativity, empathy, and strategy. But the gods had not gone unnoticed. In the distance, beyond the storms, Lauren sensed a presence, immense and incomprehensible. The warnings in the archives had not been exaggeration. The gods were watching, and they did not like what the Thrin were doing. Days passed and Lauren continued her experiments. The creatures began to perform more complex tasks, transporting resources, fortifying weak structures, and even coordinating with multiple teams simultaneously. The Thrin were learning to think like humans, and in turn, the creatures were learning from them. Rill approached her one morning, excitement in his voice. "Lauren, the creatures, they are beginning to strategize on their own. They are predicting problems before we even notice them. And now so do we." Lightning tore through the sky, wind toppled buildings, and floodwaters surged through the streets. The creatures acted immediately, lifting debris, reinforcing structures, and rescuing those trapped. Lauren and her team worked alongside them, coordinating in real time, thinking creatively as humans had taught them. It was exhausting, terrifying, and exhilarating. By dawn, the city was battered but intact. The council, who had watched in awe, finally began to understand. The creatures were not threats, they were allies, and the humans, though gone, had left behind a legacy that could save a world. Lauren stood on the steps of the council tower, watching the sunrise. The storm had passed, leaving the city alive but scarred. She knew the gods were still watching. She knew their experiments could bring punishment. But she also knew the truth. Humans had survived against impossible odds, and their strategies could teach the Thrin to survive too. In the quiet of the morning, Rill joined her. "Do you think the gods will intervene?" he asked. "They may," Lauren said. "But if they do, we will be ready. We are learning what the humans knew long ago, and that knowledge is stronger than fear, stronger than any storm." The path ahead would be dangerous. The planet's decay continued, and the gods were patient and watchful. But for now, Lauren allowed herself a rare smile. The first step had been taken. The Thrin were beginning to understand humanity, and with that understanding came power, strategy, and a chance to save their world. The creatures waited nearby, silent but alert, ready for the next command. Lauren knew that the future would demand more than obedience. It would demand imagination, courage, and the human-like ability to anticipate the impossible. And she was ready to teach her people to meet that challenge. The legacy of humanity, forbidden yet undeniable, was awakening. And the galaxy, still unaware, was about to learn that humans, though absent, had left lessons that could outmatch even the gods themselves. The air on Thrin Prime had grown heavier in the weeks after the second summoning. The storms no longer came at random. They twisted across the skies with intelligence, striking at the edges of the city and retreating just as quickly, as if testing the limits of what remained. Lauren stood on the observation deck of the council tower, her four-fingered hands resting on the railing, eyes scanning the violet horizon. Every flash of lightning reminded her that the planet was still dying, and that time was slipping through her fingers like sand. Yet there was hope. The creatures were no longer unpredictable monsters. They had begun to act with initiative, solving problems before the Thrin could even instruct them. They reinforced buildings, redirected floodwaters, and even organized rescue operations during the storms. But more remarkable than their actions was their intelligence. They began to adapt independently, anticipating both the Thrin's needs and the chaos of the planet. Rill approached her, carrying a tablet filled with new observations. "Lauren, look at this," he said, his voice a mix of excitement and disbelief. "The creatures are starting to make decisions we didn't teach them. They're creating strategies." Tasks were prioritized automatically, and when one creature moved to complete a task, another adjusted to complement it. It was as if the creatures understood the concept of teamwork far beyond anything the Thrinn had imagined. "This is what humans did," Lauren said softly. "Humans didn't just give orders. They communicated, they observed, and they adapted. These creatures are reflecting that intelligence. They are thinking like humans. We learn, we adapt, we act." Lauren gathered her team for a new type of training. It was no longer about improvisation exercises or simple problem-solving. They were now practicing tactical coordination, inspired directly by the human archives. She divided her team into groups, each working with one of the creatures. Their task was to anticipate a scenario, a building collapsing under floodwaters. The creatures had to rescue survivors, stabilize structures, and prevent further damage, all without direct orders. At first, chaos reigned. The Thrinn struggled to communicate with the creatures effectively. Some gave contradictory signals, others froze under pressure. The creatures, however, adapted quickly. They paused, analyzed, and then acted in unison, correcting human mistakes, anticipating outcomes, and sometimes even guiding the Thrinn away from danger. By the end of the session, the team was exhausted but exhilarated. The creatures had not only followed instructions, they had improved upon them. Lauren could see it in the council's observations as well, awe, fear, and admiration all mixed together. But as the Thrinn grew more confident, the planet reminded them of its fragility. A massive storm rolled across the horizon, darker than any before. Lightning streaked down in violent bursts, and the wind tore through the city with destructive force. Floodwaters rose quickly, threatening to sweep away streets, markets, and homes. The council's confidence wavered. They had seen the creature's effectiveness, but the scale of the storm was unlike anything before. Lauren and her team rushed to the summoning circle. Energy crackled along the lines, humming as it readied for another arrival. The creatures appeared with the familiar flash of light, massive and alert, their glowing eyes scanning the chaos. They did not hesitate. They split into teams, moving with coordination that seemed almost premeditated. The first challenge was the floods. Streets were quickly turning into rivers, and people trapped in homes could not escape. One creature lifted a collapsed wall, creating a bridge for those stranded, while another redirected the water by moving debris strategically. Lauren's team observed carefully, giving subtle signals, but mostly allowing the creatures to act on their own judgment. In one sector, a building teetered on the brink of collapse. A creature positioned itself beneath the structure, its limbs absorbing the weight, while others cleared nearby debris to prevent secondary damage. Lauren could see the calculations in their movements. A step forward, a shift in balance, a careful placement of force. These were strategies humans had developed over centuries of warfare and survival. Even the storms themselves seemed to respond to the creatures' actions. Lightning avoided structures reinforced by them, and floodwaters were diverted by their precise interventions. Lauren realized something incredible. The creatures were not just acting on human reasoning, they were applying it in ways the Thrinn had never imagined. Rill pointed to a distant section of the city where a massive spire was about to collapse. "It's too far, there's no way." Pride that her people had learned, fear that the gods were surely watching every move. After hours of chaos, the storm finally began to retreat. The city was battered, but nothing had been destroyed irreparably. The creatures had saved countless lives, prevented massive structural damage, and most astonishingly, acted in ways no Thrinn had anticipated. The council chamber was filled with stunned silence. Varen, the elder who had once warned Lauren, finally spoke. I see it now. The creatures, they are not merely tools. They think, they plan, they are partners, and they are learning from us as much as we are learning from them. The gods tried to forbid it, but humans created a way of thinking, a strategy that can survive even the impossible. We are only beginning to understand it. Lauren felt it too, a presence immense and incomprehensible. The gods were aware. The following days were tense. The Thrinn continued their training, integrating human strategies more deeply. They learned to think ahead, anticipate consequences, and improvise like humans had long ago. The creatures acted as both teachers and partners, guiding the Thrinn in subtle ways. Lauren observed their interactions, marveling at the adaptability and intelligence that humans had embedded in these beings. Rill approached her during a break in the exercises. "Do you think the gods will intervene directly?" he asked. "They might," Lauren said. "But we are no longer helpless. We are learning from humans, and humans survived against beings far stronger than any god could imagine. That knowledge, that adaptability, it is our strength now. The creatures, sensing the threat, moved instinctively, positioning themselves between the city and the godly being. The emissary spoke, not with words, but with thoughts that echoed in every mind. "You have defied the decree. You have called upon humans. You will pay the price." The only hope was strategy, the kind humans had perfected over millennia. "We will fight," she said aloud, not with weapons, but with reason. "We will use intelligence, coordination, and creativity. That is the power the gods do not understand." They maneuvered, adapted, and responded to the emissary's movements, using tactics the Thrinn themselves had barely grasped. Lauren guided them, but mostly she watched, amazed at the human-inspired intelligence displayed before her. The battle was unlike anything the Thrinn had ever faced. The emissary's power was immense, yet the creatures anticipated its strikes, countering with strategies that combined speed, leverage, and coordination. They did not rely on strength alone. They exploited weaknesses, adapted to changes, and worked as a cohesive unit. Hours passed. The Thrinn coordinated with the creatures, thinking like humans, improvising in real time and slowly gaining ground. The emissary, though powerful, was forced to retreat, unable to predict the ingenuity of creatures guided by human strategy. As it vanished beyond the horizon, Lauren felt a mix of relief and awe. The creatures had survived, protected the city, and demonstrated the true strength of human reasoning. The Thrinn had learned not just to follow commands, but to think, adapt, and innovate, just as humans had done. That night, Lauren stood on the observation deck once more, looking at the city below. It was battered but alive, a testament to the intelligence and courage of both the Thrinn and the creatures. She knew the gods were still watching, but she also knew that the galaxy had begun to understand a truth the gods had underestimated. Humans, though absent, had left a legacy of ingenuity, strategy, and resilience that could change the course of worlds. The creatures rested nearby, silent but alert, ready for whatever challenge would come next. Lauren realized that this was only the beginning. The Thrinn had survived the storm and the godly emissary, but the journey ahead would demand more strategy, more courage, and more human-inspired innovation than ever before. The planet was still dying, the storms still raged, and the gods still watched. But for the first time, Lauren felt that her people were not helpless. They were learning, adapting, and surviving in ways no one, including the gods, could predict. Humanity's legacy had awakened, and it was teaching a dying world to fight back. And the galaxy would never underestimate the power of human intelligence again. The sky over Thrinn Prime had turned an ominous shade of violet and black, swirling with energy that seemed alive. The storms no longer appeared random. They moved with purpose, striking distant regions before retreating, almost as if scouting the city's defenses. Lauren stood atop the council tower, her eyes fixed on the horizon, sensing the tension in every crack of the wind, in every distant rumble. Something far larger than the previous emissary was approaching. Something that would test everything she and her people had learned. Rill joined her, panting after climbing the tower steps. "Lauren, it's massive. The readings, it's not just one being. There are hundreds of them moving in formation, and they're not random storms. They're coordinated. They know what they are doing. The gods are coming themselves, or at least their forces. We have to prepare every creature, every Thrinn, every strategy. Nothing can be left to chance. The gods' forces are beyond our comprehension, but we have something they do not understand: strategy, improvisation, and intelligence inspired by humans. That is our edge. Not because we are strong, but because we can think, adapt, and innovate. That is what humans left behind. That is what the Thrinn can learn, and that is what the gods cannot predict." The Thrinn teams practiced their strategies tirelessly, simulating attacks and emergencies, learning to anticipate outcomes instead of reacting. Every obstacle, every potential threat was planned for, but always with room to adapt. When the first wave of the godly forces arrived, the sky itself seemed to split apart. Immense beings, incomprehensible in form, descended from the clouds, radiating energy that shook the ground. Buildings trembled as the air pressure shifted. The creatures emerged from the summoning circle, towering, glowing with intelligence, and moving with a calm that belied the chaos around them. The Thrinn took their positions, each team ready with strategies inspired by humans. Lauren stood in the center of the council chamber, her eyes scanning every angle, her mind running through every plan. The creatures moved first, anticipating the godly forces' attacks, redirecting debris and fortifying structures. Rill shouted, "They're adapting faster than we expected." They're predicting moves before they happen. The godly forces struck with raw power, hurling energy that flattened streets and shattered walls. But the creatures countered not with strength alone, but with clever strategy. They split into units, luring some attackers into traps, diverting energy flows, and using the environment to their advantage. Where a Thryn team hesitated, a creature guided them, signaling which path to take, which building to defend first, which lives to save. Hours passed. The city shook under the impact of divine power, yet the creatures and the Thryn adapted, holding their positions, preventing catastrophe. For every strike they had a counter, for every attack a strategy. Lauren moved among her people, giving subtle signals, watching their coordination improve with every moment. At one point, a massive godly being focused its energy on the central plaza, intending to crush the city's core. Lauren quickly assessed the situation and sent signals to the creatures. In a synchronized motion, they lifted massive debris to redirect the energy, forming barriers and channels that funneled the force harmlessly into the riverbed. It was a maneuver humans might have devised centuries ago during desperate battles, and it worked flawlessly. The council members, watching from a distance, gasped. Some whispered that it was impossible. Others began to understand the truth Lauren had been teaching all along. Intelligence, coordination, and adaptability, human traits could match even the gods' raw power. But the gods were relentless. More forces arrived, larger and faster, and the sky darkened further. Lightning struck in precise patterns, seemingly trying to isolate and destroy the creatures. The Thryn teams worked tirelessly, guided by human-inspired logic, improvising defenses and anticipating threats. Every move, every calculation was a life-or-death decision. Rill, exhausted but determined, approached Lauren. "We can't hold them forever. They keep coming and they're learning from our tactics." That is the human way: adapt, innovate, and overcome. We cannot match their power, but we can outthink it. Lauren observed in awe. Humans had designed survival strategies that went beyond brute force, and now the Thryn were applying them in real time. As the battle continued, Lauren realized something extraordinary. The creatures were no longer just responding to human logic. They were extending it, creating strategies and maneuvers that even Lauren had not anticipated. They flanked godly forces, created diversions, and executed multi-step plans, all while protecting the city and its people. The tide began to turn. What had seemed like an inevitable defeat was now a stalemate. The gods' forces were powerful, but they were predictable in ways the Thryn had learned to exploit. The creatures and their human-inspired strategies were forcing the divine beings to adapt, to react, and to reconsider every move. Hours merged into a full cycle of night and day. The city was battered but standing, the creatures and Thryn still coordinated, still learning, still improvising. Lauren felt exhaustion in her body, but also exhilaration. The impossible was happening. A dying planet, forbidden knowledge, and creatures linked to humans were holding their own against divine power. The gods, sensing resistance they had not anticipated, began to withdraw. Their forces retreated, not defeated, but cautious. Lauren watched as the immense shapes vanished beyond the horizon, leaving the city in battered silence. The creatures remained, standing alert, scanning for threats. The Thryn gathered in the council chamber. Exhaustion weighed on them, but so did awe and pride. Varin, the elder who had doubted Lauren at every step, finally spoke. "I see now. The creatures and the humans they represent have taught us something the gods cannot undo. We survive not because of power, but because of thought, strategy, and courage. The gods may watch, but they cannot undo what humans taught us, the ability to think, to plan, to survive. That is a power even gods cannot fully comprehend." They had protected a dying city, coordinated like generals, and displayed intelligence far beyond what the Thryn had expected. For the first time in centuries, Lauren felt true hope. The planet was still fragile, storms would continue, and the gods would watch. But the Thryn had learned the greatest lesson humans had left behind. Strength was not enough. Intelligence, courage, and adaptability could overcome even the impossible. That night, as the stars slowly appeared above the battered city, Lauren walked through the streets, observing the creatures and the teams of Thryn working together. Bridges were repaired, homes reinforced, and the wounded cared for. Every action reflected strategy, foresight, and understanding, the hallmarks of humans' forgotten wisdom. She knew the gods would return sooner or later. But she also knew that the Thryn were no longer helpless. They had learned to think like humans, to anticipate, to improvise, and to survive. Humanity's legacy had given them the tools to fight against even divine forces. And in the quiet of the night, as she watched the creatures move with intelligence and care, Lauren realized the truth. Humans had not just survived, they had left behind the greatest weapon of all, their mind. The city was safe for now. But the war of intellect and strategy had only just begun, and the galaxy would soon understand that humans, though absent, had left lessons that could outmatch even the gods themselves. The morning light filtered through the battered clouds above Thrin Prime, painting the city in shades of gold and violet. The storms had finally retreated, leaving the air crisp and the ground strewn with debris. Buildings stood cracked but upright, rivers had been partially redirected, and the creatures, the allies humans had left behind, moved silently through the streets, patrolling, repairing, guiding. Lauren walked among them, her eyes scanning the horizon. The previous confrontation with the godly forces had changed everything. The Thrin were no longer passive citizens waiting for divine intervention. They were learners, thinkers, and partners in survival. They had absorbed lessons humans had left behind: strategy, foresight, adaptability, and courage. And now those lessons were becoming more than theory, they were practice, alive in every decision the Thrin made. Rill joined her, looking both tired and exhilarated. "The city survived," he said. "But what next? The gods won't stop. They'll return with greater force, and soon." The air was tense, but the mood was different from before. The council members no longer whispered fearfully, they spoke with cautious confidence. The creatures' actions during the battle had proven that the humans' methods worked. Lauren presented a new plan, a strategy not to fight blindly, but to prepare, coordinate, and innovate. She spread a holographic map of the city and surrounding regions. "The storms and godly forces may return," she said. "We cannot stop them with force alone, but we can prepare. We will train every Thrin to think strategically, to anticipate, and to work alongside the creatures. We will create a network of defenses that adapts and learns, just like humans did long ago." "It is a dangerous path, Lauren, but I see now it is our only path. Humans survived impossible odds, and their lessons are alive here. If we follow them, perhaps we can endure." Flood channels were redirected and rerouted dynamically, reacting to changes in water flow before disaster struck. Thrin teams practiced improvisation, learning to communicate with gestures, signals, and strategy rather than strict commands. The creatures became teachers as well as allies. They guided the Thrin, showing subtle cues, anticipating challenges, and helping them think several steps ahead. Lauren watched in awe as her people adapted, learning lessons the gods had thought forbidden. The city began to thrive in a way it had not for centuries, a living experiment in human-inspired ingenuity. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the violet clouds, the first warning of the gods' return arrived. A tremor ran through the city, not from the storms, but from the very energy of the universe shifting. The creatures paused, scanning the skies. Lauren felt the presence before she saw it, immense, overwhelming, impossible to measure, yet focused. Rill whispered, "They're coming." The Thrin teams moved into position, but Lauren knew that brute force was useless. The creatures would be their shield, their partners, and their guides, but the real weapon was intellect, human-inspired strategy, and coordination. The battle began. The godly forces struck with overwhelming energy, but the creatures and Thrin did not retreat. They moved as one, each unit anticipating the next strike, using obstacles to their advantage and redirecting energy flows in ways that the divine beings could not predict. Lauren coordinated from the council tower, issuing signals that combined strategy, improvisation, and human logic. One of the creatures, larger than the others and with eyes glowing brighter than before, leapt to intercept a godly emissary. It did not attack directly. Instead, it guided the emissary's energy into channels designed to protect the city while exhausting the divine being. Another creature moved to a damaged bridge, reinforcing it just as a wave of power struck. Each movement was precise, thoughtful, and preemptive. The Thrin teams followed the creature's guidance, thinking like humans in every action. They anticipated threats, created contingencies, and adapted in real time. When one plan failed, they adjusted immediately, improvising new strategies. The godly forces, powerful as they were, began to show frustration. The Thrin and the creatures were unpredictable, acting with intelligence beyond brute strength. Hours passed. The city shook, skies roared, and the ground quaked, yet the defenses held. Lauren realized something profound. The creatures were not just acting on human-inspired logic, they were teaching it back. They guided the Thrinn, improving their strategies and creating a feedback loop of learning. Humans, though absent, were alive in the minds and actions of the Thrinn and their allies. Rill shouted, pointing to the horizon. "Look, the emissaries, they're hesitating." The creatures and Thrinn were adapting faster than they could react, using intelligence, anticipation, and strategy to counter every strike. Lauren smiled, realizing that humans had left a legacy stronger than raw power. Thought, creativity, and coordination could overcome even divine might. The battle continued through day and night until the emissaries finally withdrew. They were not destroyed, but they recognized a force they could not control. Lauren and her team, exhausted but triumphant, watched as the skies cleared, leaving the battered city alive and intact. In the aftermath, the Thrinn began rebuilding, but differently than before. The creatures continued to guide them, teaching them lessons in anticipation, coordination, and strategy. Lauren helped her people integrate human-inspired problem-solving into every aspect of life, from infrastructure to emergency response. The city began to thrive, learning to adapt, innovate, and survive against forces that had once seemed impossible. The council gathered one last time. Varin, standing taller than he had in years, addressed the room. "We have survived storms, monsters, and godly forces, but the greatest lesson is not in victory. It is in understanding, in intelligence, and in courage. Humans left us this gift, and we have used it. The gods may still watch, but they cannot undo it. Their legacy is not strength or weapons. It is thought, strategy, and courage. That is what we now carry forward. We are alive not because the gods allowed it, but because we learned to think, to anticipate, and to act with intelligence humans left behind." They were no longer monsters, no longer weapons. They were partners, teachers, and reminders of the power of intelligence and creativity. The Thrinn, inspired by their human predecessors, were no longer helpless. They could think, adapt, and survive. Rill turned to Lauren, his eyes reflecting the glow of the creatures. "Do you think this peace will last? The gods may return, storms may rise again, but now we are prepared. We have learned from humans, and that knowledge is stronger than any force. We will endure, we will survive, we will thrive." The creatures moved silently among the streets. The Thrinn coordinated with precision, and the city thrummed with life and purpose. Lauren walked among them, feeling the weight of history and the spark of the future. Humanity's legacy had not just survived, it had reshaped a civilization, saved a dying world, and defied the gods themselves. Thought, courage, and ingenuity had triumphed where raw power could not. And in that moment she realized the greatest truth: humans may be absent, but their influence was eternal. Their intelligence, creativity, and courage could outmatch even the gods, and the galaxy would never underestimate them again. Thrinn Prime was alive, its people inspired, its creatures loyal, and its lessons human. The storms would come, the gods would watch, but the Thrinn were no longer helpless. They had inherited the ultimate weapon, the mind of humanity, and with it they would endure. Lauren looked to the horizon, the city bustling with life and purpose. The creatures moved in patterns that reflected intelligence. The Thrinn teams coordinated flawlessly, and for the first time the world felt truly alive. Humans, though long gone, had left behind a gift greater than any weapon, the power to think, to adapt, and to survive against all odds, and that power was now theirs.